Where are you at the moment? It looks much
Um,
nicer than where I am.
I'm in Sao Paulo for a week or so.
My goodness gracious me, that sounds fantastic. Well, today you've been kind enough to join us to talk about a topic that I'm hoping is quite close to your heart. I know it is to mine, and that is really creativity in digital marketing or advertising more generally. And we've been kind of chatting this week about this topic. I've been saying to everyone, it'd be great to start by looking at where we are today, the status quo, and then focus on how we make things better, how we think differently, how we use technology more judiciously, more compassionately, more thoughtfully, and bring it back to the goals that we normally have in advertising, whether we've strayed from those or not. So we'll take questions as always from people. You can drop those into the Q&A and the chat box, so feel free to do that. And in addition, I'll get us started, Tom. Then where we are today, I know you've been posting a bit about this sort of thing recently. I'll start with a very big question, but it'll lead us into the smaller ones. What is the role of data in digital marketing at the moment? And what are the pros and cons about the direction that we've taken for creativity?
Okay. I mean, to start off with, I want to say thanks for having me on this thing because I love talking about this. And from afar, I probably appear to be extremely grumpy and sort of curmudgeon about this. And what it is I think we have this extraordinary array of devices and we have this wonderful new capability. And I'm absolutely shocked by, as an industry that spends nearly $1 trillion a year, how badly we do everything, because I think it could all be incredible. Like I think everything can work much better for brands. I think it can work much better for media platforms. I think it can work much better for normal people. And I think somehow we've got ourselves into this complete spiral of a complete a complete sort of devaluation of people's attention, complete lack of respect for people's time. We're somehow getting all of our incentives entirely sort of mixed up. I think data is part of that. At some point, I almost want to sort of take a step back and explain how we got here as a sort of historical journey. But to answer your question, I think in a way the curse of digital is that we have so much data. We get data in real time. We get data that appears to be very precise. We get data that we can gather very quickly and cheaply. It means we can optimize. And I don't think that's a particularly good thing generally for something that's quite close to an art. I don't think it'd be useful for a grandmaster's painter to be able to see in real time how people respond to them painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling. I don't think that'd be that great for a movie maker or a musician to be recording music and be, to get told what note people just added or what lyric people just added and whether people like it or not. I think sometimes we need to be hidden from the data. Because of everything else, we tend to measure things which are very easy to measure, which don't really matter that much. I think I have never deliberately clicked on a digital ad in my life. I know I have by mistake many times. I know there have been many ads that I've been forced to watch. But by any particular spreadsheet of the measure of success, every single form of digital advertising or normal advertising has now failed with me. But yet I sit here with Nike shoes. I've got Muji shorts on. I've got a Samsung TV. I've got a Mercedes and a Lucid car. Somehow advertising has worked, but yet I don't appear to have been doing it right as a consumer. So I think we have this absolute obsession with data, and I think data has replaced our ability to think. It's replaced our ability to feel. It's removed our ability to take risks. And it's not the data's fault. Like, the data is amazing and data is helpful. The problem is that it's become our God. It's become the only thing that we're held accountable for. It's become the only thing that our bosses care about. It's become the only thing that our bosses care about. And there we are, looking at spreadsheets rather than looking at the world.
And it's an interesting metaphor you use there. Data has become our God, because that was going to be my next question. What do you think? I would also address, I don't think you come across as particularly curmudgeonly. Obviously, I've met you in real life a few times. You're not, even online, you're not so bad. You're not so bad. Saying the things others won't. But I would ask, in relation to that almost religious metaphor, what do you think is at the root of that deification of data? Why has it happened?
I'm determined to get this sort of story out, because it'll help us sort of get a broader understanding. And this is just what happened to me. You know, there were hundreds of thousands of people working in advertising at the same time. I was lucky enough to enter the industry in about 2001. So my first 2 years of advertising were not really done in the kind of current digital era. Oddly enough, I made an ad for Nivea Sun to appear on Tesco TV. Tesco TV was this sort of strategy to put TVs across the aisles of Tesco, a large grocery store in the UK, which if you did today would be very contemporary. It would be considered a very strong strategic move towards building a retail media network. But at the time it was a complete failure, and it was a very expensive form of advertising, and it was mainly used to kind of smooth out trading agreements. But anyway, other than that, I'd never really experienced digital. And then about 2002, I think it was, I was working on the Nokia account, and on a media plan, working for a creative agency, I saw banner ads. And we didn't really know what to do with those, so we sort of ignored them for a while. And then we got a sort of grumpy phone call from the media agency a few weeks later saying we hadn't supplied the banner ads. And then as a sort of judicious account man, I had to phone up the media owners and find out what these meant. And it turned out that basically was a sort of a different sort of a different ratio of the print ads is what we got told to make. So we basically just sort of gave them to someone in production. We gave them all of our print ads, we gave them all of our TV ads, and they did something with them and they supplied them, and nothing really happened. And then a few weeks went by, and then someone asked me, where these ads should lead to. And I didn't really understand the question, but what it turned out is, if you clicked on the ad, it was supposed to take you somewhere. And we were quite lucky because we had a website. So we just told people that if you clicked on them, it should go to nokia.com, job done. And it was a good example of how we didn't really take this very seriously. We didn't really put our best teams on the jobs. We didn't really care. We didn't really design this with sort of measurement at the core. And what happened is these ads didn't really work very well. No one was really in the habit of clicking on ads. So all of that scope of work got taken from us. So we were told never to supply digital ads again, which was probably a good thing. And then what happened is the industry entirely bifurcated into two different forms. So we had sort of creative agencies, and we had lots of money, and we had creative directors that were a pain in the ass, and we had taxi bills coming out of our bums. We went to Cannes. We had long lunches, we got drunk in the afternoon, we talked about stories, we talked about films. We were quite a sort of obnoxious sort of creative agency, where all we really cared about is whether the stuff felt good. Meanwhile, in sort of parallel, the entire digital world was basically sort of sucking up money that we'd been given to them to make digital ads. And they had different conversations with their digital clients. And they very much obsessed with the latest technology. People were using, I think it was called like iBlaster at one point. People were making sort of ads in Flash, all sorts of like pop-ups and pop-unders. And this whole sort of quite dubious world of digital advertising emerged, where they just had completely different conversations. We never wanted to be in their rooms. We never really wanted to talk to these people. If they worked for the same agency, they were often in the sort of basement. Or they were in the sort of attic rooms where the ceiling headroom was low, and the entire world sort of completely bifurcated in that way. And we never tried to get on with each other. We never tried to respect each other. And I don't think we've ever really brought those two sides together. I think creative agencies have always been very dismissive of new technologies. Creative agencies have never got excited about them. Digital agencies have learned that they should never talk about brand. They should never talk about narratives. They should never talk about story arcs. That they should instead be sort of focused on a sort of pixel by pixel creation of something that's optimized. And they should test every shade of blue. They should test every format. They should play about with words. Everything within the digital landscape was the sort of antithesis of the world of creativity. And the reality is that both of us were wrong. And the right way to do this stuff is to have a much more data-informed creative approach. It's to not be obnoxious. It's to focus on what's working. It is to optimize. It is to be aware of what technology can make possible. It's to get excited about new things that have never been done before. But it's also not to just obsess with the details.
So I got into this industry in 2010, and I have only ever worked on the digital side. And it's funny hearing it from your perspective. We would probably flip that on its head and say, oh, I mean, you're not saying anything that's wrong about the stereotypes that we we were digital agency of record for American Express. Right? So we would turn up as Dentsu, Ogilvy would turn up on the other side of the table. They'd talk for 90 minutes about brand and we'd kind of snigger a bit, and then we'd get down to the real stuff. We're here with the numbers, right? We don't care about any of that. And then in order for the client to be impressed, we would of course go for lunch after and say, oh no, that is interesting. Oh no, you'll have to tell us more about that. Oh, maybe we should make this a monthly roundtable. Yeah. And then we'd all go our separate directions. A month later, they would deliver the creative and we would crop it and turn it into digital ads. And that would be it. We didn't care about any of the other stuff whatsoever. And it was interesting to me as I started to get to know those guys more, I started wanting to transition over to what they were doing because it seemed much more enlightened and much more interesting. But you used a key phrase there, and I noticed there's one other one you didn't use that we were always talking about at the time. And I found it really interesting. For the first about 6 years I was at Dentsu. And in about 2011, everyone decided that we weren't going to call ourselves a marketing agency anymore. 2010, we were marketeers. 2011, we were data-driven marketers. Right? And as far as I knew, in that office, nobody had gone to Stanford and done a PhD in statistics over the summer. These were the same guys who now just claimed as a branding technique, we are data-driven. And you used the phrase data-informed. So I wonder what the distinction would be in your mind, if there is one, between this data-driven notion of it being complete driving force versus being informed by data.
I mean, at the heart, it's about which is your kind of primary language and which becomes the dominant factor. And I think it's probably possible to get bogged down in the semantics of this. And as a former planner, I like doing that. But I think more than anything else, it becomes, we need to be very, very respectful of what the data tells us. We need to be really aware of what we can measure. We need to be really aware of the agenda behind what's being measured. And we need to have conversations that are somewhat enlightened because we're not ignorant to these things. But we also need to be aware that many, many things that are really, really important don't change very quickly. Many of the things that we're responsible for are not the bigger picture. I don't know how old people are who are on this, but anyone that's towards the sort of start of their career, work for different agencies and work for different parts of the pie. I've sat on judgment sort of programs for the Effies and things like that. The reality is that when someone goes into a Carrefour and they buy your ironing water, or they buy your shoe polish, or they buy your laundry detergent, or your shoelaces, or your margarine, because we work across very, very different categories, they will do so for loads of reasons. And some of that will be because of the weather. Some of that will be because of the time of the year. Some of that will be because of the packaging. Some of that will be the place on the shelf. Some of that will be because of a promotion. Some of that will be because the competitors are out of stock. Some of that will be because there was a really great ad that happened very recently that put a very urgent message in for them to go to the store. Some of it will be because they remember an ad for that brand when they were growing up. At some point in the process, they may have seen a digital ad, and subconsciously it may have reminded them that this brand exists and this brand is big. Advertising is an incredibly sort of complex industry that can actually be quite simple as long as we understand how complex it is. And more often than not, our job is to do quite simple things. And that's just to sort of lodge a tiny, tiny little idea into someone's head and then later on make it easy to buy. I'm sort of quite dismayed by what digital advertising has become, because at some point, probably around about 2011, we gave up on this idea that these people should ever be in the same room together. And we decided that everything that was sort of traditional media, whatever that meant, should be a form of brand building. And therefore, we should sort of let those people not really talk about data that much. And, we'll let the media agency talk about the data because the creatives from the creative agencies, look a bit grumpy today. And we took all digital spend and we kind of called that performance, which somehow suggests that the brand stuff, didn't actually do any good. And we decided that those people can talk about click-through rates, and those people can talk about optimization, and those people can talk about sort of programmatic buying, and those people can talk about auctions, and those people can talk about real-time bidding and cookies and tracking. And we sort of let these things become two very different disciplines. And therefore, I think, broadly speaking, both sides are quite wrong about most things. And broadly speaking, both sides can learn a ton about things from each other. Neither side is more correct or more smart or more stupid. There just needs to be this real sense of like bringing everything together to produce stuff that makes sense. Probably the worst thing we ever did in digital media was call it digital, because digital doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't describe anything. If I watch stream TV through YouTube, is that digital? The best word, and I'm sounding very old now, the best word is the word we used about 1997, but after cyber was a bad word. We called it interactive. We used to call it interactive arts. We used to call it interactive media. We used to call it interactive advertising. And there was a sense that someone could do something. There was a realization that if I show a TV ad to someone telling them that, Portugal's a great place to go on holiday, they can't do anything. If I show them a digital ad saying Portugal's a great place to go on holiday, I can then put a button on that site saying, buy a flight from your local airport to Lisbon today. I can see how many people are clicking on it. I can make that ad slowly perform better. I can play around with different price points and see what price point is the most exciting. That level of interactivity is what's incredibly exciting about digital, and we keep on forgetting that.
So this brings me to a next little bit, because we have a good question here from Lex, and I'll feed this into it. I was just about to shift into this part, because we had, as digital marketers, and we did, of course, rebrand as a performance marketing agency about 2012. Data-driven. At first, it was just data-driven performance marketing, and then realized, let's just call it performance marketing, but we're data-driven as well. So all that stuff happened. But then around 2016, 2017, there were a few kind of Damascene moments for us where we realized, almost to Lex's question, I'll get to in a moment here, that we hadn't been measuring everything correctly in the first place. And all that stuff we've been saying, and all those reasons we've been laughing at the creative types for not understanding the data, we were turning up with bogus numbers in the first place. We were double counting things. We actually, one of the groups of people we started chatting to was the CFO. I was working for a major retailer in the UK. And we turned up and talked about this amazing quarter we had just had, and we'd blown everything out of the water. Search marketing was overperforming. It was crazy. We were a money printing machine. And he said, "Do you know what the real return on investment is on any of that?" Well, what do you mean? Google tells us it's 6 to 1. And he was like, "Well, if it were 6 to 1, why would I be investing in anything else? I would literally hand you the keys to the company and say, turn us into 6 times the size." Maybe they're not telling you the full truth. You're not factoring in that 60% of the products you sold were returned. Right? You're not taking that into account. You're turning up and telling me this when the bottom line looks terrible. And another thing, to Lex's point here, is ad fraud. I mean, there's a huge amount of that. So Lex is asking, Tom, what are your thoughts on the issues of ad fraud and how murky that supply chain is? What do you think it would take to force a change in how the ads are distributed and measured?
I think there is more ad fraud than anyone has ever claimed. And I know people have made claims up to like 90%. I think basically ad fraud is absolutely everywhere. There's many, many different types of ad fraud. And I think no one really wants to talk about it that much because generally speaking, it's not in anyone's interest to do so. When you go to Cannes and you look at those yachts, this is what happens when an industry needs to demonstrate to people that it has confidence in its own future, that it's a sort of proper company. Broadly speaking, the digital ad environment is one of spectacular technical prowess, but underlying sort of structural flaws and stupidity. You can go on any website and see how many trackers load if you turn off your ad blocker. Sometimes you get 120 ad blockers. No one could ever ad trackers. No one could ever explain why any client would need that much tracking information. There's an enormous amount of sort of sophistication, but there's almost no real compelling wisdom that sits above it all because people are afraid to ask questions because this thing has happened fairly quickly. There's a lot of people creating sort of smoke and mirrors. And therefore, no one really wants to know. It's also worth remembering that the power comes from media budgets. So if you're in the sort of digital space, you want as much money as possible to spend because that gives you power, that gives you control, that gives you staff. So I think it's an incredibly big problem that not that many people are incentivized to sort out. And I don't think that this fraud is necessarily the result of sort of, bad people in the industry. I think it's because we went about everything the wrong way. So at the same time, back in 2001, when I'm making these banner ads for the first time, the reality is these ads didn't perform very well, because when people are on the internet, they're trying to do something else. The internet is not a sit back media most of the time. We're trying to talk to a friend, we're trying to find out when the train leaves, we're trying to find out how much the ticket on the bus is going to be. We're not there to sort of consume ads. Ads never really performed very well, so they became quite cheap. Because they were quite cheap, all of the media that was moving from traditional to online wasn't really making any money. NewYorkTimes.com wasn't making much money, BBC.com wasn't making much money. These sites cost an absolute fortune to create. They put valuable content out there and they weren't making any money. So the only way they could make more money was to make more inventory. So every single site had more and more ads on it. Because there were so many ads, they didn't really perform very well. Because they didn't really perform very well, they weren't really worth that much money. So all of the costs, the value of media tended to go towards zero as we were making more inventory. Then, like a really curious and sort of cruel twist of fate, we got addicted to the internet. We spent more and more time on it. And slowly we just created more and more inventory. Like the longer we spend on TV, just means that the ads get seen by more people. The longer we spend on the internet, the more inventory gets created. So every single force that ever existed in advertising was one that suppressed the cost and the perceived value of online advertising. So we got towards this point, which was ridiculous, where clients have somehow expected online ads to be cheap. We somehow expect to be able to serve 1 million impressions on the New York Times website and it to not cost that much. We've entered a completely sort of false paradigm where the assumption is that you can reach someone, an Instagram influencer with 1 million viewers, and to buy one post with them shouldn't be absurdly expensive. So we've got to this point where the only way we could deal with the fact that everything was basically unbelievably cheap was to sort of lie about the quantity. And therefore, I think the entire industry became complicit in completely lying about everything. I've been offered a lot of jobs from a lot of publications that claim to have 100 million unique users every month. And you do a tiny bit of searching around them because you'd never heard of them. And you'd realize it was all either completely fake traffic or sort of arbitrage traffic. So in every single direction, in a multitude of ways, something between not very good practice, accidental overcounting, and utter, incredibly nasty ad fraud. This is across the entire industry in lots of different places. And some of the projects I'm working on now are to start thinking about investigating this stuff. But at the same time, I'm a little bit worried because I don't want to have some sort of horse's head put in my bed for finding $37 million worth of advertising that's just spanked up the wall into someone's bank account. So,
yeah, it's not an industry that welcomes that kind of questioning, even if it's genuine and innocent and not necessarily leading anywhere. It's what made me more suspicious about what was going on where I was working. So, they're shutting things down here pretty quickly, and I work here. What must be really going on? But it's interesting you mentioned that it becomes, we actually used this phrase when I was working at a big agency. It was an arms race between us and our rivals to have more of this stuff, because then you had more power, then you could get better deals with publishers, and you could offer better prices when you went to a pitch. So obviously it's all about, in a very rude way, the money, but it's a prioritization of quantity over quality. So with that in mind, say we've gone about this the wrong way. Maybe let's first of all start utopian, and then we'll get down to the practical parts. But what might that look like if it were different? I mean, what's possible in the digital world that maybe wasn't before, the interactive world, and how would we, if we were to start again, what would we do?
Well, so the beautiful thing about those sort of fairly unpleasant forces that I talked about before, and this sort of hopeless spiral of decline, is that appears to be quite dramatic and that appears to be quite unsolvable, but it's not. I mean, we effectively just need to make that circle go the other way. The reason that digital ads don't seem to work particularly well is they're not very good. And the reason people think they're not very good is because no one's put any time and effort and care into them. So what we really need is a wholesale change in our thinking towards digital advertising. So we need to assume that people actually watch them. We need to have a person that sees the ads that goes out and make sure that they're okay. We need to stop assuming that the best way to do advertising on the internet is to do micro-targeting. At one point in preparation for this, I started making a little presentation of bad ads and good ads. And most of the bad ads I got were ones that were just bizarrely targeted at me. One would be like a company that does the exterior painting for aircraft. Another is trying to sell me like industrial riveting equipment. Another is trying to get me to join in a class action lawsuit for injured NFL players. So companies are being sold on this idea that we have this incredible data that can be used to micro-target people. So all of these things are basically going wrong. Like all of these things lead to terrible ads to the wrong people. And therefore we're sort of like pulling on the levers, sort of hijacking things and lying, trying to pretend that this stuff is working. When you sort of draw a line into that, make ads that work, make ads that work in the long term, make ads that are beautiful, make ads that do more than just lead to more traffic. And then at the same time, we probably need to have a realization that every form of digital media is massively underpriced. I know this sounds awful and it sounds sort of counter to the current environment, but we have artificially made things cheap. If we can all spend a little bit more on ads and realize quite how effective they can be, this combination of spending more at the same time as having ads that perform much, much harder, I think will be a very, very good thing. This sort of overcrowding is happening everywhere. You go on Amazon and you see how many of the results are now paid for. You go on Google and you see how many of the results are now paid for. Like somehow there's no restraint on this idea that maybe as a person you should receive a fairly small number of ads every day that are utterly brilliant and compelling and helpful and useful, and they're shown to the right person with a sensible amount of data.
I would advise people to perform a similar exercise to that, actually, Tom. I just went to people like Twitter and LinkedIn and asked them to send me all the lists that I'm on as an advertiser. I was on over 4,000 advertising lists on Twitter alone, including Alaskan soccer moms, Volvo drivers of Texas. I may have had those phases in my life, but they don't define me. I do other things. So they're absolutely crazy. There's about 7 things wrong with all of these things, and I look at it, and I obviously have worked in places where we believed going into people saying we have data-driven precision marketing. We can really drill into your audience, knowing that we're really just throwing a load of mud at the wall and hoping something sticks. But you mentioned, okay, those ones sound like pretty funny, but also bad ads. What do the good ones look like then in an interactive or digital environment?
Yeah, Clark, I looked at your questions before time and I spent a bit of time on this and I was determined to not be miserable. The reality is, and we can all think about this because we're all on this call together, if you really have to think about an online ad that you've noticed and you cared about and that was somewhat helpful, it's really, really hard to think of one. We all have TV ads that we grew up with. We've all seen print ads that stopped us in our track. We've all seen outdoor ads and thought that's really clever. It's absolutely astonishing that we have never really thought that way. I'm in a curious position. I don't use Instagram that much, but for some reason, whenever I use it, I don't get served any ads at all. I'm not sure what happened. Obviously, it's a form of blessing, but I am led to believe by other people, and I've been to people's houses and seen the absolute crap that they've bought. They've told me it's because of an Instagram ad. I'm led to believe there's lots of really good ads on there. And I think that is, I'm sounding like I'm contradicting myself, but I think that is a function of the quality of the data they have to some extent as well. So I'm led to believe there's lots of good ads on Instagram. I've not seen them. I believe that the best digital campaign I ever saw was I think from like 2004. It was Mac versus PC. At the time, sort of Apple was doing a campaign against Microsoft, and they effectively took their TV assets of the two sort of comedians, discussing the merits, and they sort of replicated those, but they replicated them in a very sort of premium and sensible way, where at the same time as a TV ad, they were carrying this sort of story on in a different media. Since then, I've been actively looking for things. I've seen things like a beautiful Samsonite piece of luggage. It was just a photograph of this luggage made to look amazing. And I believe it had a buy now button. So I went from thinking this case looked amazing to clicking on buy now to seeing it was actually quite surprisingly expensive and then not buying. But it made me realize there was something really sort of compelling to the idea of simplicity. I've seen some decent ads for electronics where you just have sort of wonderful pack shots. But I still believe we're doing everything wrong. For some reason, many forms of digital advertising, when you actually look at them, are not trying to get you to sell something. They're trying to get you to click on another page to find out more. And you end up with these really bizarre situations where there'll be some form of, wonderful premium shampoo, and then it tries to get you to go to a website to hear stories of young founders and their journey to launch companies, despite not having much confidence because their hair wasn't great. And there I am thinking, I don't know, this is just a shampoo. Like, maybe just tell me a bit about the shampoo. Maybe tell me where to buy it from. Maybe let me buy it right now. You'll see car companies where, again, you'll see this fantastic shot of this new sort of super off-road vehicle. And you think, oh, maybe if I click to find out more, maybe it'll tell me amazing routes I can drive on near my house, or maybe it'll tell me how I can test drive a car, or maybe it'll just make a little video about all the wonderful things about this car. And instead, it takes you on this journey for, bold people who explored the world, by yacht. And you're thinking, like, what's going on? Like, why are we trying to get in the way of people finding out more about this particular vehicle that for a fleeting moment of time I've shown interest in? So honestly, I think the whole world of digital media has gone completely nuts. I think everyone's sort of just looking at the wrong spreadsheets. They're saying yes in meetings when they actually should be saying no because they don't want to stand out. There are some amazing facts in the space, like click-through rates, generally speaking, have absolutely no correlation whatsoever with any metric that matters. If you want to increase click-through rates, just put a picture of a small child or a sort of baby rabbit on your ad, and you'll get click-through rates that skyrocket, but nothing good will happen. We're still trying to get people to like brands on social media, even though, again, there's no proven ROI from doing that whatsoever. The whole industry's just lost its way quite a lot, really. I think, in particular, this idea of precision, I'm just going to go on about this for a while, but there is this feeling. So I'm in, where am I now? I'm in Sao Paulo right now. My Airbnb is going to expire tomorrow. I do need to stay here for another night. There's this sort of dreamlike scenario where my computer will know all this stuff and I'll be magically served an ad for a sort of Marriott hotel down the road. And I'll sort of be hit by this ad and notice this ad and then book the ad. And then that will be a really successful form of advertising. It doesn't generally work like that. Like, almost no ads lead to like an immediate impact. We would be far better off not guessing that I'm in Sao Paulo, not guessing that my Airbnb is about to expire, not guessing that I might be on the Bonvoy program. We'd be better off just, generally speaking, doing ads for great hotels around the world. It would be far more sensible to not make these guesses about all of these aspects of someone's life and instead just do relevant advertising, not personalized, not irrelevant, but find something that's quite irrelevant. If you appear to quite like cooking from your data lists, show people ads for wonderful olive oil and the sort of provenance of the olives that go into it. If someone appears to like cars, show them lots of ads for cars. Show them ads for a new form of car insurance that measures how you drive if you're buying a sensible car. Just do sort of fairly logical, sensible things rather than aiming for genius all the time.
So this last little section takes us into the very interesting area of what is currently going on and what might come next for digital advertising, because in theory, it could lead to something more akin to what you described there, and it could be better ads, more thoughtful, more probabilistic, not deterministic kind of ads. And like, we have a comment here saying, LinkedIn micro-targets me as a physician. I'd have to guess it stems from me having clicked on an article in Practical Urology that made it activate a subscription. So now it considers me a neurologist. And this is the way we follow everything, right? If you look at something on a website, you will be hounded by it until you're at the gates of Hades. Like, it is never going to leave you. And the studies, where there are academic studies in this, show that retargeting, so following somebody with ads, works better if you just show them a branded ad after, you don't show them the product that they were looking at. Because, well, maybe they left the website for a reason. Maybe it's not the product they want. Maybe they can remember themselves. They don't need to be reminded all the time. And it can have a negative effect. But reminding them of the brand is a defensive mechanism too. It stops them going to the competition. So when they do think again, I never did book that holiday. Where will I go back to? Well, subconsciously, they go back to, this was actually based on sandals, the couples resorts place. So there are studies that show this kind of thing, but there's a massive gap between academia and digital marketing too. So it never sees the light of day. I don't know if you've seen some of the things that Google has been trying to suggest it will do next, now that a lot of cookie-based tracking is going to disappear. And from my perspective now, thank God for that. It's calling this Google Topics API, where and digital marketers are up in arms about this, because they're saying our beautiful ROI will be gone forever and we can't get the client budgets we used to get. But the theory with Google Topics is it'll be based more around contextual advertising than data-driven targeting. So let's say that you are into cooking. It is able to pick up on that because you look at some recipe websites. So it adds you to a list with none of your other data, just saying, Tom is the kind of person who is interested in this. And then the next time you go to a recipe website, brands can bid to show an ad alongside you. But they don't know enough about you to say anything beyond that. It might be a new olive oil they want to show. Now, there are two things about that. The first is the industry hasn't responded well to this as a proposal, because I guess it's like a drug. They can't be weaned off this that quickly, this way of targeting with cookies. I don't know if Google will go down that path, but how would you imagine we can get to a world in which digital marketers would think more in those terms, and what impact would it have for the creative quality that they might have on show?
I mean, I've been talking about this stuff for about 10 years now. I've sat in meetings and done a sort of passionate demonstration, really, of why click-through rates are irrelevant and why they don't work. And everyone will, I mean, they won't stand up and applaud and throw their underwear at me, but they'll agree. And then the next person on the agenda is someone coming in to talk about the sort of monthly KPIs, and they'll talk about click-through rates, and everyone will just act as if we didn't just all agree that they were a complete waste of time. I don't think many people really want to change. I think we need to remember how short-termist every part of this industry is. CMO tenures are not really changing that much. People like to think they're coming down rapidly. They're not really. But at the same time, most people do their jobs for sort of 2 or 3 years. And that means for the first 6 months, you're kind of useless and not really paying much of attention to most things. For the last year, you're probably slowly thinking about your next job. And that kind of means you've got about a year and a half of actually doing your job quite well and focusing on it. And in a year and a half, there's no point really in improving brand metrics. There's no point really in making a big change. There's no point really in having passionate discussions about how your heart is telling you you're doing the right thing. Most people are just fixated on getting really, really short-term results. So if you can show that, 253,000 people liked your post on Instagram, that's great. If it didn't change sales, that's going to happen on someone else's shift. So I think in a way we're not really set up for this, and I think it's going to take like a whole sort of mindset shift, really. In particular, we're becoming obsessed with this idea of moving money closer and closer to the point of sale. I'm sure you saw, it wasn't a big story, but Vizio potentially being bought by Walmart. And the idea is that Walmart be able to say that they've got a retail network that now includes TV. So now if I'm watching the news and I get served an ad for Marmite or Diet Coke, if I go into a Walmart and buy a Diet Coke quite soon, it's going to look like it was that ad that made me do it, even though that's clearly nonsense. Clearly the reason why people buy Diet Coke is because of 1 million impressions and the taste of the drink, but because it's very, very easy to justify it. So we're getting close to a point where it's more important to be able to attribute success and to create what appears to be success very quickly than it is to actually create success in a way which is broader, but not as easily measured. So I think, if anything, our entire industry is destined to get more and more scientific and more falsely precise and more wrong. And I'm not entirely sure what's going to change that, because this level of sort of wrongness is kind of everywhere. and everyone's having conversations about things which are quite stupid all the time. You end up in sort of countless situations where people ask you to calculate what they think the ROI of putting on a trade show will be, or what's the ROI of putting on a road show, what's the ROI of this new product going to be. We have no idea. Like there are many things in the world that we have no idea. We can feel our way through and we can sort of make sensible guesses, but we can't sort of know. So this idea towards sort of relying on our gut, and this idea of just making ads which are really compelling, this idea of reinforcing branding by having consistent assets, this idea of having taglines that resonate with people, of having jingles that people remember, all of the things that worked really well in marketing for 150 years would work incredibly well now. But I don't really see any sort of movement towards doing that, really. Which is partly why I don't really work in the industry anymore, because it kind of annoys me.
Yeah, I was amazed to see something happen with a former client of mine, Adidas. And this was part of me leaving Dentsu because I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I realized that there was huge value for a career in being the guy who would put an ROI figure on things, even while saying in a meeting room, I can make up a number for you right now, but I have no idea. And they would just sit and just look at me, and their eyes would just force me to just give us a number. Just give us a number. I said, look, this is nonsense. This is nonsense. But the ROI of this campaign will be 112%. The notepads come out 112%, 112%, 112%. And I realized early on that you could even tell them what you were doing. It's like this magic trick in front of them. Yeah. But if you're the person who says the ROI will be X, it doesn't matter if it turns out being that way, because you just claim, well, the measurement's wrong, or we don't have the right data, or oh, maybe next time, or whatever, competitors.
And I understand that to some extent, because people are just trying to get back to a model where they stick 112 in
of course,
a spreadsheet. But you wish that people would fight against the system a little bit more and say, you know what, like I'm making a business case for this next ad campaign, but just so you know, these numbers are sort of plus or minus 20,000%.
Well, Adidas, actually, we worked with for a couple of years, and we were saying to them, we're spending way too much on this performance marketing, because really what's happening is you're buying the available impressions for different searches, but because you're not advertising anything to do with your brand, those are the cheaper clicks, but nobody's searching for your brand any more than they used to, whereas your competitors are investing in that sort of thing. And about 3 years ago, Adidas came out and the headline in Marketing Week or whatever was just, we overinvested in performance marketing, and everyone sat up and took notice. And it's the same people as well that we've been working with, and they said, we really undervalued brand. And then Airbnb did something similar, and people started talking about it. Like with all these things, God knows if people will actually change anything, but it was the first time people started to take notice of that. And like you say, for anyone that is more of a classical marketer that understands the history of the industry, this is just the most basic thing in the world. This is a funnel that you are not topping up. You are just at the bottom trying to get more, and there's not more coming in. So it's a diminishing pool that you're paying more for a slice of. And the industry just doesn't really want to see that. But I will, because we're on time, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. I have to ask you, maybe I won't get, you didn't want to seem too curmudgeonly, but I have to ask you about how you see AI and creativity in digital marketing. How can it be used positively?
No, I'm very positive about what it should mean. And to be clear, sort of going back to what I was saying before, I think as an industry, it's impossible to change the industry, but within your role, within your department, within your company, it's very, very possible. As it happens, we should remember that probably most people on this call are probably going to be working for fairly big agencies or fairly big clients. And therefore, to some extent, we just need to remember that most of the tools and the technologies that we talk about are much more useful for quite different clients. So micro-targeting is amazing if you've got like a small hotel in the Shetland Isles. You don't need people in Arkansas to know about your hotel. To be able to do geo-targeted ads if you're a small brand is amazing. If you're making, a particular type of golf club for left-handed people, then it's going to be amazing to have data on who definitely plays golf and who's left-handed. But what I'm really saying is that most people here will be working for fairly big brands with fairly big budgets, with fairly broad audiences. And the reality is that if you're making a breakfast cereal, if you're making margarine, if you're making sliced bread, If you're making a low-cost airlines, like quite often your target audience is quite broad. You may do some TGI studies and find out that people who are cyclists are 8% more likely to fly with EasyJet than Ryanair. That still means you're talking to people that are not cyclists. Anyway, so AI, I think AI in particular will be very, very compelling for much smaller companies. If you have been unable to make decent video ads, if you've been unable to buy decent copy, if you've been unable to sort of find anyone to help you out, then AI will get you from being unable to do something to being able to do it in a fairly mediocre way. So it is incredibly interesting for the world of marketing. It's just not that interesting generally for the world of sort of agencies and the big brands that we talk to. AI is a whole sort of baggage of very different tools, everything from image recognition to robotics to automation, to text generation, to code generation, to video generation. So it's very hard to talk about it as a whole. I think generally speaking, it's a very good way to create new ideas that we might not have otherwise thought about. To create mood boards with it, to create sort of probing questions with it, to sort of exercise our minds in unusual ways. It's quite good. It's pretty good at doing some forms of research. You can use it to automate some type of qualitative research. You create sort of animatics to help you do testing. But it's such a sort of broad question that it's much easier to say, this is a particular client, this is a particular category. Here are the sort of the scope of the project we're talking about, and then you go, what can AI mean for this? Because it can do everything from help you write better emails to help you run better meetings to help you produce more advanced CGI. But you need to sort of refine the scope a little bit more. But generally speaking, I see it as being something that's very unlikely to replace many of our jobs. And I see it as a force to make much better advertising in a more efficient way. Not because we're saying AI, come up with a campaign line for a new convertible, but because we're sort of always thinking in the process, how can this lever get me to do a bit more? How can I consider ideas that I might not have considered? How can I rethink this target audience in a different way? But you really have to sort of put effort into it. Like this thing is a sort of piece of equipment to make you work harder. It's not a robot to sort of lift things for you. That's a really bad answer because I was answering it quite succinctly. But no one here should be that fearful. But you should also remember we've had upwards. I mean, everyone talks about how AI can do all this stuff. All of this stuff could have been done with $5, $10, $15 and about 10 minutes on Upwork. So this is not necessarily something to revolutionize every aspect of our job. It's just something to sort of keep in mind and to experiment with.
It is. Sorry, it was a broad question deserving probably its own session. That's on me. But it's a good answer because I think something that the studies find so far. I know I keep going absolute nerd about these things, looking at my studies, but the studies so far, and even looking at things like Google's automated campaigns and things like that, when people are given this technology, they're more effective if they work harder with it, but they don't tend to do that. They tend to become complacent. They tend to think, oh, thank God, the robot's here. Right. I don't have to do anything anymore. Here's all of our brand assets. I'm not even going to give you just the good ones. Here's everything. Do your worst and just let me know when the results come in. So there's a little bit of work because it's not inevitable that happens, but it is inevitable if you don't do anything to course correct.
Yes. I think a lot of these technologies, actually, I think working from home is quite a good thing. If you take a sort of below average employee, I'm sorry to talk about these things in such terms. If you take a below average employee and you allow them to work from home, you're probably not going to get particularly good work from them. If you get a below average employee that's not particularly motivated and get them to use AI, you're going to increase the amount of average work you get from them. If you have people that are really good at what they do, that are in the industry because they really care about what they accomplish, that are aligned somewhat with the vision behind the company and they understand it, that are quite keen on sort of accomplishing things and being, a compelling and flourishing individual. And then you give those people these tools, and then you give them support, and you make them feel valued. Then I think extraordinarily powerful things can happen. So the sort of onus really is to make sure that you're sort of doing your job with a good attitude, and you're trying to learn and you're trying to experiment. But I don't think we should come to these things from a place of fear. We should come to them with a sense of curiosity. There is this overriding thing, I think, which is that a lot of AI is making things more similar, and it's making things more average. And a lot of people that are saying very dramatic things about AI are incredibly limited in their understanding of the world beyond AI. There are people who think that, Sora can make a movie, because it's able to render out a few seconds. There are people that think that AI can make music. These people have absolutely no understanding of the miracle of art and the miracle of craft. And they have no realization that, the top 0.00001% of songs will make like 60% of all the profit in music that year. So these are industries where you have to be remarkable. Our industry should not be driven by efficiency. It should be driven by effectiveness. It's not that helpful. If you're going to spend $50 million on media, it's not that helpful to make an ad for $500,000 less and it not be very good. It's much better to spend like $1 million more and it'd be amazing. So.
Absolutely, yeah. So, yeah, good point. That's a nice little soundbite that works well. Effectiveness greater than efficiency. Yeah, it works very well. Well, Tom, as always, a great pleasure chatting with you, and thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Everyone, thanks for coming along. I will send out a little recording and a few notes afterwards, and you can join us for our next session. We'll be back next week as well. So, yeah, big thanks, Tom. Hope you enjoy the rest of your time in Sao Paulo.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Speak to you all soon.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
Take care. Bye.